Hey, good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, whatever time of the world it is where you are. I'm assuming that most of you are in India, but I do know some of you who are not from Europe and the Americas, as far as I know. And unfortunately, this does happen a bit late for people who are east of India. And so I'm not expecting that many from that part of the world. But thank you for making the time. We expect to go on for maybe like a couple of hours today. Table Talk is a fortnightly series of conversations about food and things adjacent to food. So it's not a recipe show. It will not necessarily, I don't think it's ever going to be a recipe show. It's going to be discussing the things all around food, right? So my guest today is Kurush Dalal, who I have met for the first time in Mumbai University when part of this fabulous, what do you call it, a center within the Center for Extramural Studies, which had courses in all sorts of things. You could do a gardening course and get a little diploma at the end of this, and going all the way to you could do your MA in archaeology, which Kurush was the department head for that. And if I'm not terribly mistaken, you revived the archaeology department after some incredibly long time at Mumbai University, right?
There'd never been one.
Okay, so
There'd never been one.
Is there still one now that you're no longer there?
Yes, it is there. We've done a lot of hard work. It took us 10 years to create a master's in archaeology. It's still sadly being run by the Center for Extramural Studies. It should have been carved off by now, and should have been its own entity. But sadly, the university claims that it doesn't have the funds to do so. And the university never has money. You have to shame the university into spending any money. Unless it's on building a building or a wall or a road where they can, everybody can line their own pockets. Let's call a spade a bloody shovel.
I mean, you, like a lot of professors who, and not just in Mumbai University, but in universities around the country, were being given this very raw deal of being given these 1 year kind of contracts where you had to keep reapplying every year, and you were
1 year, 6 months.
Sorry, every 6 months. My bad. Sorry. Yeah, and you had to keep reapplying and asking for your next 6 months, and that was the way that the university is.
And you don't even get your 6 months on time. So it's not like at the end of 6 months you get your next 6 months. You've got to keep working without a salary for 3 or even 4 months before you get a backdated letter, appointing you. But the letter date is for that current day on which you get the letter. So you actually get a letter, say, suppose appointing you from 1st June, and it gets to you on the 20th of August. And the letter says, please join immediately. So you actually have to give a joining letter, which says, I am hereby joining as of 1st June, but my letter date is 29th August. So the first time I sent one, I said, you got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous. And they said, no, sir, this is the format. Aisa hi hota hai.
And how many years did this go on, Kurush?
So this went on for 10 years. So I joined a job which came in through something called the 12th plan. And it was a 2-year post that we got. By the time the university machinery got off its fat ass and did the advertisements and the appointment, there were just 7 months left. So I had a 7-month job, at the end of which I was told, don't worry, there will be a couple of extensions and then it will be regularized. This is the way it happens. So I got 2 extensions and 2 or 2.5 extensions, and then nothing for 11 months. No letter, no salary, nothing, 11 months. And the vice chancellor came over because suddenly we were being visited by top brass from Delhi. And they found out that we carried 4% of the university's score as the extramural studies department. So the vice chancellor came over in a bit of a hassle. And my boss, Dr. Karnik, said, by the way, Dr. Dalal is here. And guess what? You haven't given him a joining letter or a salary for 11 months. And even the VC was gobsmacked. He was like, 11 months? So yeah, we've written about a dozen times to you. And guess what? He calls me back in like 3 hours flat and says, okay, we can make this happen. but I'm really sorry. You will have to step back from the 6 pay commission to the 5th. And I can start you off and give you your back pay and everything. And I should have probably quit then. And I asked Dr. Karnik, and she said, look, take the money first for 11 months because you worked for it. And then you can decide what to do. And then we just kind of went on every 6 months. And then finally, at the end of it, they wouldn't even give me an extension. They asked me to apply for consultancy. And they were going to pay me less than I started off with 10 years ago and cut 10% TDS. At which point I said, thank you for the music and you can shove it where the sun don't shine. And I was given the usual blackmail. Think of the students, think of the discipline. We need you. I said, yeah, but I need to pay the bills. Which is reality. I need to pay the bills. That's how it works. India.
So, Kurush, I thought I'd just start off by stepping back a little bit while you grew up with an archaeologist, your mother, though everybody knows her name, the legend, the catering legend. Not very many people know that she was also an archaeologist, a PhD in archaeology, right? If I recall right, Dr. Kurush Dalal. And so you grew up with both food and archaeology in the house, right? Could you tell us a little bit about your mother's journey?
Oh, Mom basically came from a very, very complex family. My mother's family and her story could be one of the Kakakaga serials. I mean, I keep thinking one of these days I'm going to write a, kind of proposal and send it to the lady who does the Kakakaga serials and say, Kakakaka Katie, and this is it. So, Mom's family has all the drama that you need. Her paternal grandfather was murdered by Pathans in the Northwest Frontier Province, defending the payroll to his death. Wow. And they slashed him to bits, threw him off a running train, and he crawled back to the station with his entrails hanging out. The whole stuff, the whole 9 yards, and made sure the station master of the next station stopped the train and stopped the payroll from being stolen because he was a Parsi, and this is what they did. And hallelujah, brother. So my grandfather, my mom's dad, kind of grew up with this hard-bitten matriarch, who had very little pension and 4 kids to bring up. And they were so poor, that the only place they could get a house was in Bandra. When I tell people this today, they can't stop laughing. So yeah, it was at the other end of nowhere at that time. And
rice fields.
I've seen the last rice fields in Bandra. Okay, so that's what there was. And her mum was an orphan. She was about 3.5 years old when she lost her mother to childbirth. And then about 6 months later, her father and her father's brother were found dead in the fields after lunch. They were farmers in Tarapur. And it seems that their vessels were green on the inside, which said that they'd been poisoned, they'd been done in. And she had an old maternal grandmother who was blind and ran a hooch den. She had a P2. So she said, oh, this is no place to bring up a little girl. I mean, you got this blind old lady running a hooch den, thinks it's not a place to bring up a little girl, sends her and all her wealth, 6 pairs of matched bullocks, matched buffaloes, this, that, and the other, and furniture, to her maternal grandfather's house, where her mamas promptly send her off to a boarding school in Bombay and register her as a poor orphan with nobody and nothing. So she's brought up being told she's poor. So that's the environment in which my mom is born. And she's got this fetish for reading, stands first in class throughout, loves history, wants to be an Egyptologist. Joins Xavier's, stands first in National College, gold medal, blah, blah, whatever, sells the gold medal promptly so that she can buy herself a season ticket to go to Xavier's. Gets admission in Xavier's, does her bachelor's from there, manages to get a scholarship, does 4 or 5 tuitions before and after, and is hell-bent on being an archaeologist. So she's one of the first women, not the first, but virtually one of the first women to do a proper master's and a PhD from Deccan College. And then she goes off to do her PhD on the Indo-Pakistan border in northern Rajasthan, sleeping with this ridiculously mean-looking knife under her pillow on a camp cot, and excavating where nobody has ventured before, finds sites that go back before the pre-Harappan period to the early Chalcolithic period over there, and wants to conduct an excavation, and is promptly told that students don't get to conduct an excavation and women are not good enough for this kind of a hard life. This is not for women. As it is, I mean, you're an aberration. So she gets married to this guy she met when she was 16 and decided when she was 16 that she was going to marry. She marries him at 26. He's a shippy. They go off to sea on a honeymoon and they know that they're going to stop in London. So she carries some of her stuff with her and they write in for an appointment with Sir Mortimer Wheeler, the doyen of Indian archaeology. And when they land there, they go over to meet him. And he looks at what she's got and said, this is amazing, you know. And she says, you know, this is exactly what you got at Cut 30 at Harappa when you had to stop digging because the water was coming in too fast. And we've got entire sites full of this stuff. So what do you think? And he says, I think this deserves an excavation. She said, I've applied, but they won't give me permission. So he says, have you spoken to the Director General, Mr. Lal? Yes. Says, I will speak to him. I happen to be having lunch with him tomorrow. I mean, look at the serendipity. Look at the coincidence. I'm having lunch with him tomorrow.
One second. Just carry on. Well, for some reason, someone's ringing my doorbell and I have no idea why because lockdown, but I just need to check this. This is fine. Hang on.
Okay. So in any case, they go there and nobody really knows what happened in that lunch meeting the next day. But before she gets back to India, her permission to carry out excavations is waiting for her in Deccan College, and nobody at Deccan College can understand how she swung it. So she goes there, excavates, is probably one of the first independent women excavators in the country, comes back, has me, finishes her PhD, and then finds out that there are no jobs for women in archaeology. Comes to Mumbai, finds out that all they wanted to do is teach modern Indian history at the undergrad level, and that also at the 10+2 level, and that's not what she wants. So she chucks in the towel, and then one day an old friend says, I've moved to Andheri from VT, and I keep dropping by at least 3 days a week to have lunch with you guys. Have you realized? So mom says, yeah, but it's okay. You know, we cook for 5, and if there's a 6th person, there's always food. So he said, look, I want you to send me dabba to my office. I can't keep doing this. And mom says, sure, we'll send it to you. He says, no, but you got to take money. And she's like, come on, your family, blah, blah. And he's like, look, I've got to stop coming there. So under suffrage, she starts a tiffin service. And 15 days later, he's back with 2 of his friends who are like, look, we're sorry, but we are eating his dabba. And he's eating junk canteen food, which he hates. Please start ours dabbas too. So that's how she started the business. And she never looked back. So, you know, it was like, if there was one passion that came to an end, here was another one that came knocking at her door. She didn't bat an eyelid, threw herself into it head first. And then somebody said, there's this Freemason hall and they're looking for a caterer, but they want somebody who does, European and continental food. Now, continental food doesn't exist on the continent. It only exists on the subcontinent. And she says, yes, give us a shot. And they did. And we were the first non-internal caterers to ever cater at the Freemasons Hall opposite Stirling. And huge banquets with lobster thermidor and prawns Newburgh and lobster cocktails in grapefruit cups and stuff like that. So very heady days, whole roast legs of lamb and whatnot. And people who, you know, ate well and drank well, that's what the Freemasons basically do. I mean, honestly. We had a fridge full of running desserts, as they were called. And, you know, everybody else these days has chocolate mousse and caramel custard, which are vegetarian. We had lemon soufflés and chocolate soufflés in champagne saucers, which were the running dessert of the day. So if you didn't like the dessert in the menu, you could call for one of these. And I was very popular with my friends because, you know, I could take them home to work after school, and there was always lemon souffle and chocolate souffle, and mom didn't quite mind us making inroads into it because we churned them out by the hundreds. So I was about 11 and I decided that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in the food business. So I very seriously sat down and told her, I said, Mom, I want to be a caterer like you. And she said, are you sure? Are you ready for this? And I said, you name it, I'll do it. So she made me a waiter's uniform. Now, I don't know how much you all guys know the food business, but you can't get lower than a waiter. Absolutely, the bottom of the barrel is the waiter. You never know when the waiters come, when the waiters go. As long as you can slap a uniform onto them and they know to serve from the left side, somebody or the other will have them under their wing. I was gobsmacked. I mean, this was downright insulting. I mean, a waiter's uniform. It was a pretty nice uniform, you know. This Nehru collar and this beautiful maroon sash, maroon pants, and stuff like that. And so I was a waiter for a few months.
You were 11, right?
And then I was 11. So after school, I was a waiter. And then she very categorically told the staff, she said, if I catch you cutting him slack, you lose your jobs. Easier to learn. And that was kind of even more horrible. It's like, come on, I thought, you know, worst comes to worst, I'll just hide in the shadows. But no, that was not happening. Then she said, okay, enough of this playing around and being a waiter. So I was back in shorts and I was doing jhadu pocha. Because jhadu pocha is the next level up from waiter. So I did jhadu pocha. I learned how to get rid of oil stains and get crud off the floor around the sigris. We used to use these big, massive burning sigris, how to carry ash out, how to stack it up past a grill so that it could be reused for washing. And then I did a month washing. That was probably the worst. You know, these huge handis. Mummy was sending tiffins at that time in the mornings, catering to the Freemasons Hall in the evenings. We were doing orders. We started doing weddings. So there was mountains of bartans every day. And from there, I went into cutting and stirring. From there, I kind of graduated a little bit to cooking, but she decided that this was enough. Okay, I knew the drill now. Either I could cook or I couldn't cook. So it was a very weird journey, Peter. And while it was happening, I wasn't very thrilled about it. I must tell you. I mean, it was fun and there was a lot of bonhomie and all that, but this is not what I wanted to do, I thought. It stood me in such good stead all these years, Peter. I can walk past one of my bhandiwalas washing something and say, pick up the scrubber, go back. And he says, what? And then I walk over and I kind of run a finger through and stick it up to him and say, and he sees the greens. And he was like, but you were 20 feet away. I said, that's why I'm your boss. And it feels damn good. I still remember I was about 13, 12 or 13, I think. And we were catering at a place called Albles Bagh, which is at Churney Road. And it had two kitchens with a central washing place. And it had two kitchens because, no, I must have been about 11 only. Because in the old days, the girls' side and the boys' side would have different caterers very often. Very proper and all that. So we used to use the other kitchen as a vegetarian kitchen. And my mother was making her run through from one kitchen to the other. And she suddenly stopped and turned around and said, Namak kami hai. And walked on. And I was like, what the hell was that? I mean, this is a cavernous bloody kitchen. Things are being cooked in enormous quantities. And what is the sniff? And immediately my chief cook, Costa, at that time turns around and says, namak kami hai. And I'm like, what the fuck? What is this sniff business? You know, what do you mean salt is less sniff? And they said, can't you smell it? And they put a spoon under my nose and said, smell it. Can't you smell that? Not enough salt in it. And I'm like, no, man, who can smell salt? So for the next bloody year, I think almost, they'd keep sticking spoon under my nose and say, Baba smell, Baba taste. Baba smell, Baba taste. It would be an ambush. Huh? You never knew when it was coming. And then after some time, the penny dropped. There is a correct smell. It's not the smell of salt. It's the smell of something that has been salted correctly. It smells right as versus it smells wrong. And if there's too much salt, it smells metallic. And I had a hallelujah moment, you know. And there's so many more people that I've met over the years who look at me and say, "You got to be kidding. You can't smell salt." And I say, "How do you think women have cooked for all these years when they were not allowed to taste food? Because it would be prasad and you would have to chadav it to the gods. And only after that would the men sit and then the women sit to eat. How do you think women cooked? What was this judgment? They could smell that the food was right or not. And yeah, it's something that we've stopped teaching people. I keep telling people, you know, Peter, that there are two things that the human body cannot do without: sugar and salt. I mean, you go back in history, uh, all the way evolutionary history. I mean, this is not just archaeology. This is evolution. Every single cell in your body needs salt. If you want to maintain the integrity of your cells, you need a certain electrolytic balance. Too much salt, your cells will explode. Too little salt, they'll shrivel up. You have to have the right amount of salt solution in each little microscopic cell that makes you. Your body automatically craves salt. Then, of course, there's ischemic pressure, you know, blood pressure for which your body craves salt. So your body has an inbuilt craving for salt. The reason you like namkeen, you like chura and you like fried eggs and you like things like that, okay, you like umami, is because your body craves salt and your brain burns sugar. One half of sugar actually, modern sugar, but it does. So your body craves sugar, and sugar is not something readily available in nature. I mean, we don't even realize today, you know. I mean, I get my apples from the guys at Kalap. They have a Tones Trails shop and you can book apples way in advance, and you know your apples are coming straight from Himachal to you. Shameless plugging over here. And very few people know that these apples were actually introduced by an American. So there was an amazing American gentleman who was the son of a very, very rich American businessman called Mr. Stokes, Satyendra Stokes. Satyendra Stokes was a Gandhian who came down and who ended up in Himachal and wanted to help the Himachalis. And he brought with him the golden delicious and the red delicious apples. The apples you eat from Himachal, we are so proud. These are our apples, indigenous apples, not Chinese apples. Buy Indian apples, actually American apples, but what the hell. But they've been here for a very, very long time. So these apples are really sweet. There are still parts of Kashmir where wild apples grow. So we've had apples in India. It's not that apples don't happen. And we've had these amazing apples in India. Okay. And Satyananda Stoke, yes, Manoshi. Oh, okay. So the amazing thing is that these little apples are this big. They invariably have a couple of bug holes in them. Okay. They're sour. They're slightly bitter. They're a little astringent and mildly sweet. So apples are not meant to be as sweet as they are today. So we fiddled and fiddled and fiddled and faddled with apples. Now, I don't know if you guys know, but if you plant a seed from an apple that you get at home, you will not get the same apples from that tree. It
True for a
cannot
lot of
happen.
fruit. It's true for
Yeah.
a lot of fruit, right? They
Lots
don't,
of mangoes.
they don't go true.
So it's basically a self-defense mechanism for biodiversity. So you have to keep grafting, and you got to keep playing Russian roulette till you find a tree that gives you the apples you want, and then you start grafting that one. And from 2,000 of those, there's one that gives you sweeter apples, and then you start grafting those. It's like almonds. Wild almonds are deathly poisonous. It's one of the great conundrums in food history and food archaeology. What in God's name made us grow almonds and start eating almonds? Why would you take a chance like that? So there's this whole thing about neophilia and neoteny that we do, you know. Human beings eat more variety of foods than any other animal on this planet. Nobody else eats as much as we do as a species. And we have this whole desire to try out new things. We also have amongst us a desire not to try anything new. So I'll have my dal bhat, kadi shak, and that's it, and never eat anything else throughout my life. And oh my God, I'm going to try puffer fish, and then I'm going to try fermented sheep's anus, and so on and so forth. Okay. So, you know, that's the balance. That's what makes us keep experimenting with our food. So we know for sure that definitely we observed animals And we realized one day that our cows were eating almonds under a tree and not dying. And like, stupid animal, bloody ate almonds, it's going to die. Damn, it didn't die. Bring some more almonds home and feed it to the goat. Damn, the goat didn't die either. Something about these almonds from this tree. Let's start propagating these almonds. And we domesticated the almond. I mean, that's the only logical way it happened. And we don't have any proof that it happened like this, but there's no other way it could have happened. But it still doesn't make any sense. Why would you play Russian roulette with your life just for almonds? I mean, what were the almonds giving you? So yeah, so there's some crazy stuff that we've done with food. Why we eat what we eat is one of the great mysteries.
I mean, all the stuff we look at, the fish that is supposed to be this great delicacy in Japan, where if you cut it wrong, you puncture a bladder or something, it's deathly poison. I mean, when you think about that, how many people died before you realize, I mean, why would you eat a fish that poisons someone else first? And then how many people had to die before you realized you had to take that sack out carefully and then carry on eating, and then it would be great.
So I have a friend of mine who actually went all the way to Japan and said, I've got to do this. I've got to eat this. So he went to a specialist restaurant where you have a specialist chef. The chef is certified to serve this, okay? You cannot eat this at a non-certified chef. So that guy goes through some serious shitloads of training about how to wield his knife. Fish comes to the table and is neatly deboned. This sack is removed, that sack is, it's all artistry happening. And then little slices of fish are cut and laid out in a peacock shape in a plate, tiny little flakes with one chive here and probably, one chili flake there. And then he has to pick it up and dip it in his sauce and have it. And I said, so how amazingly good was it? He said, actually not. So I was told to look for the tingle. So there's a little bit of the poison in the meat too, but very little. So you feel the tingle of the poison and you play with death. But you safely play with death because the gallbladder has been neatly removed without puncturing. I was like, and you paid an arm and a leg and a few body parts for this. So yeah, gives me bragging rights. So I suppose, what the hell, it does. That's probably a damn good reason to eat stuff.
I will go into some of this stuff more specifically, but first, could you perhaps spend a few minutes on your own journey into archaeology?
Okay, so I was not going to be an archaeologist. I was going to be a physicist. I was not just going to be any ordinary physicist. Mind you, I was going to be an astrophysicist and I was going to be a nuclear physicist. And my hero was Freeman Dyson. And he was my hero because unlike millions and millions of Indians, I hated Rakesh Sharma. When I was a little boy, he destroyed my dream of being India's first astronaut. So when everybody else was doing cartwheels when he said, Sare jahan se acha, I could have stabbed him to death with a blunt teaspoon. But, well, it was done. So I decided I was going to be an astrophysicist and nuclear physicist. And I read everything that I could through my 9th and my 10th and my 11th and my 12th. And then I spectacularly failed my 12th in physics.
Might be a little problem, yeah.
Yeah, but he probably was writing stuff that my teachers, let's not say they didn't know, but they didn't want me to write. Who knows? Maybe I was just being too cocky. I also failed in maths, by the way, which was always a possibility. My math was bad. And I decided I was still going to do it and pass. And I did. And then when I went to get the subjects that I wanted to a year later, they said, you can't have this combination. Okay, why don't you give me this one? So you can't have that combination either. Said, that's weird. Okay, give me this one. And they said, no. I said, if I want to do physics, you mean I have to do maths and stat? Why? I want to do physics, chem, zoology. No. So why not? No. Then I later realized that there were genuine scheduling problems. of trying to figure out, how I'd been in class when everybody else was in class, and I'd probably have one lecture at 8 in the morning and the next one at 5 in the evening, kind of things. So, when you realize that when you become a teacher and you try to do scheduling, at that time I was livid. And then I heard that Wilson College, where I was from, was starting a brand new batch. They were reigniting the ancient Indian culture and history department. So they said, if you can round up 10 people, we'll start the department. So I actually stood in line and convinced people to take this as an ancillary. And we had about 20 of us. And we waited for an entire month for class and nothing happened. And then they said, sorry, university said you can't restart the department. Once you shut it down, you can't just restart it. Why ever? God knows. You can't. Protocol. So they said, what are you going to do? I said, I want to do this now. I mean, I gave up my science to do this. Why don't you take political science? It is also science. I could have slapped the registrar. I swear to you. At 19, I could have slapped the registrar or said something stupid like, why don't you take political science? It's also science. But you can't do these things. So I said, no, this is what I want to do. This is okay.
You've taken entire political science made famous.
I could have done that. Yeah. With my beard, I would have been the second guy to have entire political science, but not my thing. So I went to meet the principal, and me and the principal had a couple of bad run-ins, but he didn't know my name. So I shaved, put on my only pair of formal white shirt, black pant, polished my only pair of formal shoes, which were, kind of neatly bundled up in a cupboard for a once in a year use. Had a very fancy looking file under my armpit, which had nothing in it. And I went to meet the principal with a letter in my hand that says, please give me a letter to shift to Xavier's because I want to do AIC. So he sees me all neatly cleaned up and all that and says, okay, why not? I mean, we're sorry we couldn't start it, and signs and goes away. And the registrar outside can't believe it. It says, does he know who you are? I said, are you going to go and tell him? No, right? So I go to Xavier's and I meet this amazing, so me and my dad go over to Xavier's and we meet this amazing gentleman who I kind of remember in my mind as being 4 foot nothing. His name wasn't that short. His name was Father Mesquita. And everybody walked on eggshells around him. Everybody. Okay. His mom probably walked on eggshells around him when she was around. So huge table, massive table in his office. And tiny man behind it. So I walk in with my dad and he looks at my dad and says, excuse me, are you the student or him? My dad's like, he's a student. Then what are you doing here? Please wait outside. It's like, oh shit. This is not a good beginning. Not a good beginning. So I stood there and said, take a seat. And I sat down and we chit-chatted for about 5 minutes. And then he says, why don't you take some other subject? I'll see what I can do. And I was like, yeah, like you really think I'm so stupid. And you tell me, why don't you go back to your own college, right? When I say take another subject. I'm not doing this to get into Xavier's. I'm doing this to get into AIC. So I said, no, sir, I've decided that I'm going to be an archaeologist and a historian. And that's the first time I said it. And he kind of threw himself across the table, all 4.5 foot of him or whatever, and stretched out his hand. I mean, he had to, that was that big a table, and said, welcome to Xavier's. Shook my hand, stamped and signed my form. And I walked out to pay my fees with all my papers, which I brought for a change. And when I was paying my fees, the guy taking my fees said, but you have failed 12th standard. We don't take failure in first year. I said, can you see the signature on this form? The principal signature. You going to tell him he signed the wrong form? So I thought of it, it's not worth it. Above my pay grade. I got myself my ID card as fast as I could, had a brilliant time in Xavier's, had a massive accident, spent a year in bed, did all kinds of crazy things. Had one of my teachers sign her name across my backside. I had my pants on. And all of these things. So I had a great time in Xavier's. Was a pain in the ass for the management. And at the end of it, went off to Deccan College to do my master's. And then I said, if I don't get a scholarship, I'm not going to do my PhD. I won't be a burden on society. Didn't know how much of a burden you become on society when you do a PhD. So my mom said, look, we are okay off. You do a PhD. I was like, no, I'm not going to do a PhD. Decided to write the UGC, wrote the UGC, and said, I'll write it in my second year MA and then I'll write it again. So first time will be like a trial run. And hopefully I'll get the lectureship. And next time I'll write for the JRF. So results come. I've gone out to my aunt's house. I go drop by at a friend's study room, and he says, "Results out. Have you seen them?" I'm like, "No." So let's go over to the department and see them. So I'm like, "What's the big deal? Kal dekhenge yaar." He's like, "No, no, no. Let's see the result." So I'm checking my result in lectureship and says, I still remember N660 something something zero was the number. It's not there. Oh my God, he starts shouting. I'm like, "What are you looking at the other board for? You got JRF?" I was like, "Really? Really?" So I did a PhD. Decided to do a PhD on a really wacky topic in prehistory. Something that nobody had ever done before, as like all good young PhDs, and I was going to change the world. 3.5 years down the line, I was sucking my thumb because there was no way to do it. And then my guide turned around and said, "You spent 2 years excavating with me in Rajasthan. You had a whale of a time. You're very good at what you do. Why don't you shift over to the early historic?" And I said, "You really think so?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, Give me a last chance. I'll apply abroad." So I applied to France. They were only too happy to have me come over. They said, "We'll even waive tuition. You just take care of lodging and boarding in Paris for a year." Yeah, like that was going to happen. So I threw in the towel, applied for a change of title, and went straight from prehistory to the early historic, the early Iron Age in Rajasthan. And hallelujah, brother. Here was this caterer slash archaeology student now putting a PhD together. Took a long time, put together what I think is a pretty decent PhD. There's a lot of things that change if I ever had to go back. Had an amazing journey doing it. Ate my way through the villages of India and the little mofussil towns of India and a lot of capital cities and things like that. Met some amazing people. Met the real people of India, the people of India's villages. Realized that people in India's villages belong first to their community, second to their religion, thirdly to their community as a caste, thirdly to their village, fourthly, if you're lucky, to their region, and maybe somewhere distantly think that they're Indian. Like, yeah, we're Indian, by the way. So the only people who really think they're Indian are these hyper-educated urban fools who think that they're Indian first and everything else after that. And this is why we don't understand the people of rural India. Because to them, being Indian means diddly squat. It doesn't do anything for them. It doesn't pay the light bill. It doesn't make the rain go away when there's too much of it. It doesn't make it come when there's not enough of it. It doesn't put food in their children's mouths when they're starving. And it doesn't get them to a hospital when there are no roads. Being Indian is crap as far as the villages of India are concerned. Sorry, get a little worked up. Came back home.
I'd like to carry on longer on this, but I do want to think that, we're 45 minutes in already.
Okay.
Let's get to what we wanted to talk about first. We talk about authenticity in Indian food. We had a long chat with one of my previous table talks was with Anton, and we talked about this in another session that you were with us on TGP, and we talked about that as well. Really is Indian, and so much of what we consider Indian actually came from elsewhere, etc. Some people know that the chili, the tomato, potato, a large number of spices all came to us via trade and now are an intrinsic part of our diet. But let's leave that part of the discussion out for now and go back to what you have learned, and you and other archaeologists and anthropologists have learned about what we ate as far back. I remember also in the Goa project talk, you had said was like, yesterday it was the Portuguese, and that was a few hundred years that you were talking about. So day before yesterday, by that time scale, and earlier, what were people in the subcontinent eating, and how do we know what we know?
Okay, so you ask questions which have very long, winded answers. So join my workshop coming up at the end of June, studying food, 10 days, 20 hours. Sorry, just kidding. If you want to, please go ahead. Follow me on Insta. But what you have to understand is that, see, Peter, first problem is there are three things that you have to do to live. Three things that you have to do. And no, voting is not one of them. Okay? You have to breathe. It's completely involuntary. You cannot stop yourself breathing. This is pure bunkum about the rishis who could stop themselves breathing for 7 days. Slow down your breathing? Yes. Stop your breathing? No, you will die. So, involuntary. The next is sleeping. You have to sleep. You can only flog yourself awake for that long before your body crashes. The third thing you have to do to live is eat. And by eat, I mean eat and drink. Okay? We never ever study that. We never study that part which is so critically important to keep us alive. We never study food. We don't know where our food comes from. We don't know the journey it takes. And we just completely oblivious to it. So about 8 or 9 years ago, my friend Rushina said, you keep talking about food and the history of various things, and the antiquity of things, and the archaeological facts that you have. Why don't you do a talk on the archaeology of food? So I said, nah, it's too much. So she pestered me for a bit. My wife had already been saying this, but wives are biased. So I ignored her too. And then Rushina said, let's do a meal where we cook what would have been eaten in the past. So we recreate the food from previous ages, and we talk about ingredients that are all pre-Mughal, pre-Portuguese. So I said, that sounds like fun. So we put together a menu and we did a beautiful khichda of jowar and bajra with lamb meat, and we spiced it with long pepper, which was actually what was used much more than small pepper, because small pepper was horribly difficult to get and only grew, on this little strip on the coast, round pepper. So long pepper and stuff like that. And we designed an entire menu. And then about 8 days before that, she said, and by the way, we've sold tickets and we've said that you'll be doing a talk on the archaeology of food before that. And I was like, sweet Jesus, what is wrong with you? So my wife laughed and said, you had this coming. So I thought, Google is there, yeah. Google will help me. Google didn't help me. Google said, pfft. I was like, nothing on Google? I mean, how can that happen? So I spent an entire day in a complete funk. Peter, I cannot tell you how I sat and just kind of stared and said, it's over. The world is over. It's all going to come to an end. And then I kind of pulled my socks up and said, okay, you've done enough years of archaeology. You've taught a lot. How do you know the stuff you know about food from archaeology? So I said, yeah, there's paleobotany, which looks at botanical remains. There's archaeozoology that looks like animal remains, animal husbandry. We look at farming techniques. We look at ceramics and storage. We look at all those implements that we use to cook with. We look at all those fireplaces and hearths and ovens and tandoors. So it's all there. The data has all been studied, researched, and put together, but in categories that are purely technical and are not food, because food is not a subject to study. So I said, okay, I can do this. I still have that old PPT, Peter. Once in a while, it's like my guy with the wreath behind saying, remember thou art mortal? So I look at it, I'm like, yeah. So we pulled it off. And people said, that was amazing. I mean, what the hell? Why doesn't anybody do this? And I was like, I don't know. I really don't know. And my wife kind of clunked me on the back of the head and said, I told you. Remember, I told you. And I was like, the wife is always right. Since then, I'm a firm believer. The wife is always right, Peter.
Only since then?
Only since then. Before that, the wife was more or less right. Now she's always right. And well, like I said, I haven't looked back. I spend more and more time reading about food, looking up food. I realized that one of our great tragedies is that food in India is the province of women. It's all that was left to women. When everything else was taken away, the kitchen was what was left to the woman. And the woman was not educated for absolutely correct purposes of keeping her dumb. You didn't want her to get any smarts, right? So women passed food on from generation to generation. And this is something I keep saying, and people think it's very funny, but it's actually true. So you do your basic undergrad with your mom and your grandmoms and your aunts, okay? And then you get married, and then you do your postgrad with your mother-in-law. And you realize that even if you're the same community and the same caste, there are nuances, there are differences, there are choices, there are preferences, okay? And any husband who says stupid things like, this doesn't taste like my mother makes it, in today's day and age, he's going to be sleeping on the sofa if he's sleeping in the house at all. Okay. She can't make it like that, yeah. Idiot. She's not your mother. Right? So you do your masters with your mother-in-law and that extended family. And then when you have daughters and daughters-in-law of your own, you do your PhD. And that's when your style shines. And that's when you leave your legacy behind, which is going to get diluted in the next 20 years. So every single generation sees at least two twists in two turns in the story of authentic traditional food in any given family. So obviously this was not documented. And as things came in which made life easier, they made more sense to women than anybody else. Women had an incredibly full day. I don't know, Peter, if you've ever done an article on what a woman in a middle class household did from dawn to dusk, okay? In a lower middle class household, it's not as an upper middle class household, from dawn to dusk, say even 50 years ago. She had a full life. There were no Sundays, okay? There were no bank holidays. It was like owning a cow. You got to milk that cow twice a day, come what may, right? So washing, scrubbing, cleaning, cooking, and this unending cycle over and over again. Filling water, fetching water, packing off the children to school, packing off the husband to work, taking care of the mother-in-law, the mother, the father-in-law, and all of those with myriad choices. Okay. Look, I grew up in a rather uh, liberal family in many ways. My mother was absolutely no nonsense. What food was put on the table was what you got. I didn't even know you had choices. The only days I had choices was my happy birthday. On my happy birthday, I was asked what I'd like to eat, and probably, if it was possible, it would be done. Okay, if I asked for something ridiculous, I'd be told to shut up. Right? I see kids today. One kid wants this, the other kid wants poha, the third kid wants upma, the father says, I want dosa, the grandfather says, I want idli. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you guys? I got 2 eggs and bread and jam every morning. That was it. I was bloody lucky that I got it. You know, maybe omelets and akuri on weekends, and if dad was around, then cheese omelets and prawn omelets and stuff like that. Because, you know, being a shippy, he was a full-time dad when he was around, or he was just not there. And I didn't find it surprising that men cook. My dad cooked when he was around. He loved cooking. So this whole thing about, oh, your father cooks, your mother doesn't mind. So my mother's bloody grateful. The fact that a refrigerator means that you can cook and put food away, the microwave that makes it possible to heat it, the electrics, you know, the electronics that you have, the mixer grinder. People say, no, but the chutney doesn't taste right if it's not made on the stone. You make it then. Don't ask your mom to make it. You make it. Get off your ass and you make the chutney and see what it takes. And tomorrow you will be a great believer in the mixer grinder. You know, I keep telling people, you don't know how much the gas stove changed life. Sitting on the floor, lighting a chula, moving on to that primers, pumping that primers, burning that bloody wick over there, all of that shit. And one switch and hallelujah, gas. So, you know, women have been liberated by these gadgets. They've got time for themselves. And I'm not saying necessarily that they were liberated from the kitchen. They were not. But they at least got some time for themselves. And all of this doesn't get recorded because women don't record this. It's only in this generation now that these stories are being told. So if we don't collect all these stories from our grandparents and our great grandparents, those of you all who are lucky enough to have them around, there's going to be very little left. So I spend my time collecting data this way and trying to work backwards from it. And that's why it's more of a culinary anthropology than it is archaeology. The archaeology gives me the ingredients at different times and spaces in India. But the anthropology helps me to work backwards and say, okay, so then how did they do it when it was like this? So this was what was available to them. And archaeology says this was the food grains, this was the meat, this was the oil, so on and so forth. People don't even realize today that there were just two main oil seeds in India forever. North of the Narmada and south of the Narmada are two different countries as far as food is concerned. And we'd all like to believe that we are this homogenized Indian mass and Hindutva is going to save us all, you know, because it's homogenized Hinduism. And we're not homogenized. North of the Narmada was essentially mustard oil. South of the Narmada was all black sesame oil. And that was it. It was only the coming of our good friends, the Portuguese, that introduced us to groundnut oil and put a major spanner in the works. Yeah, so we've had safflower oil once in a while, and we've experimented with this, that, and the other. It's not like we didn't have any other oil, but these were the main oil seeds. You know, every single area in Bombay city had an oil mill where there was a bull who would go walking around and around in circles. I've actually seen that mill, and I really feel old now. Okay. I was a really little child when my grandfather took me over to see this in Bora Bazar Street. It was one of the last ghanis like that left. And the fact that you bought grain as in oil seed and took it over, and then this guy ran it through for you. And there were specific days when he'd do mustard and specific days when he'd do sesame. And if you haven't eaten hot chapatis at home with warm sesame oil that's just come out of those stones, where that poor Goluka bell has been going round and round and round and round, poor bugger, who's probably leaning on one side for the rest of his life. Okay, you haven't lived. I mean, it just doesn't taste the same out of a bottle or a Tetra Pak. But so much of our food is about convenience. The fact that we can order food in, Peter. I don't know. I keep asking people who are in their 50s that I know, how many times do you remember your parents ordering anything in? When you were a 10-year-old, tell me, Peter, how often did your folks call for food?
Never.
Never. I mean, it was unimaginable. You went out 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, some special occasions or some party or something like that. I remember we went to neighbors, relatives, that kind of thing. But nobody called for food home. I mean, what a ridiculous thought. Today we can't live without it. But it's convenience and it's a fact. And I'm all for it. I'm not going to say, no, let us go back to drudgery in the kitchen and throw away all the electrical appliances and cook everything fresh. And it has to be farm to fork. And it has to be like our great grandfathers lived. Bullshit. Absolute and complete bullshit. Thank God for modern devices. But respect the way it was made before. And if it's possible to do it that way, with minimal discomfort, why not give it a shot once in a while? So I'll give you an example, Peter. I was excavating at a site called Chandor, about 120 kilometers south of Bombay. And very close to it is Masla, which was part of the Janjira state. One of the important towns is Janjira state. So we'd go there for everything that we needed. It was 10 kilometers away from us. And there was a Tambat Ali, where there were coppersmiths who were still beating out copper vessels and doing kalai, the tinning of the copper vessels. And one day I went there and I saw this lady in a burqa walking with a huge bag, which she was virtually dragging in. So I quietly followed her in, and she wanted to sell a lot of old brass and bronze vessels, by aluminum vessels, because these were heavy and they were not happening. And she genuinely said, look, give me the price. I know the price. They were weighed and put aside. I kept my mouth shut till she left. And she was given credit. There was no cash transaction. No? This was old school. She was given credit of this much. Please come and tell me what aluminum vessels you want, and I will get them ordered for you. So I went in and asked her if I could see those vessels. And in that, there was this beautiful parat, flat, slightly widening sides coming up, beautifully beaten in. The name had actually been Tacha Marad. So not even machine written, It had been beaten in with a spike. And pretty heavy stuff. Small guy, about this big. And Ria was with me and she said, I want this. And I said, if you want this, it's yours. So we bought it for scrap. and we took it away over to the neighbors who cleaned it with acid and put a fresh kalai on it, and we brought it back. And it's slicker than a non-stick. And because it's that thick and it conducts heat so well, it does such a slap bang job. We've had it forever. Every 2, 3 years, we get it colored. And that's about it. So if you can, it's fun to do these things. And you also then get to see how people did it. So, I ended up spending a lot of time with these guys, seeing how they make copper vessels out of a sheet of copper. So all it takes is one hammer and a large square stump on which he turns and beats and turns and beats and turns and beats. And then he uses a smaller hammer and turns and beats and turns and beats and turns a flat sheet into a beautiful round vessel with a carenation and a rim coming out and everything. And you're like, it's magic. But it today costs so much more than something that comes out of a factory where it's factory pressed. So yeah, handmade, artisanal, all of that. It's fun to have if you can afford to have it. And I'm all for it if you can. If you can't, there's absolutely no shame in using Kitchen in a Box by Prestige.
I mean, that's one of the other things we've discussed in the past on Table Talk was the way that technology changes what we eat as well and how we eat. But yeah, but let's do lip service at least to what we're calling this evening and go back a little further to what we know about what people ate. As what is the earliest information that we have on what people in the subcontinent ate? For instance, food particles may not survive, so you have to tell in other ways. But what is the earliest thing that we know that people ate on this side of the subcontinent?
Okay, so the first people that we know of in India, for whom we have evidence, doesn't mean there weren't other people, are from near Madras, and they ate bone marrow. I know a lot of people from Madras are going to get very upset at me for this, right? So the oldest human occupation that we have is from a place called Atrambakkam, not far from Madras near Pundi. We have a date of 1.51 million years ago for people who use things called hand axes and cleavers. And we know from examples all over Africa where they were first made that these were essentially tools that were made for breaking bones and getting at marrow. Human beings were scavengers.
This is what we refer to now as the ancient South Indians?
This is what we refer to as the Homo erectus, our cousins in South India.
All right. Okay.
So this is what they ate. So they ate fruit, they ate root, they ate bark, they ate grasses and seeds. All the seeds that we eat are basically grasses, as in all our grains are basically grasses, okay? So they collected and ate grasses, they ate fruit when they could. They opportunistically hunted, which means, if there was a lizard basking in the sun and wasn't paying attention, bonk, yummy. Did they cook food? We don't think so. We have no evidence for food being cooked at this point. They stole eggs from nests. They ate grubs and insects. And we work with anthropologists who work with primitive populations to see how they exploit the landscape, to understand how people with that technology could have done so. So it was a very protein-heavy diet. And this was responsible, we believe, I mean, data could make us change our minds, is why we evolved the way we did. It was our pursuit of meat and a pursuit of fat. And fat more than anything else, because fat is not easily available in nature. Nature isn't brimming over with fat just waiting to be eaten. The amount of grass a cow has to eat, spends its entire life eating so that it can live. So human beings jumped ahead of the queue and gave themselves time by becoming better and better hunters. So the next big step is about 300,000 years ago, when we first start hunting. We now are no longer opportunistic hunters, and of course, we take every opportunity we get. But we're now hunting and gathering very seriously, and we make the first spears. And they're not like spears you expect today. They're basically long pieces of wood, either sharpened at the end using a stone tool or with a stone tool wedged at the end. So from far away, you can poke somebody without getting horned, stabbed, clawed, chewed, so on and so forth. And in places like Europe, where we are seeing this really happening, our ancestors are taking on cave bears. Ursus Peleus stands 12 feet tall. These are the same caves they're living in because those places are easy to keep warm. Okay. So guys are getting eaten, chewed up, spat out, and they're eating those guys who are chewing them up and spitting them out. So it's a very, very interesting time. And they are definitely using fire. And they're making clothes out of the skins of these animals. And we have all that evidence on the tools. So use wear patterns on the tools, protein residue analysis, so on and so forth, tells us what they ate, how they lived. We have bone tools, we have ivory tools, we have beautiful needles with eyes start making an appearance. And we then have modern humans, as we call ourselves, Homo sapiens, really making an appearance somewhere around 75,000 years ago. We emerged from Africa and we go to Asia first. It is killing the Europeans, who always thought that modern humans first went to Europe around 43,000 years ago. It's killing them that modern humans are in Asia as early as 75,000 years ago. It's been like gut wrenching for them after all these years. They've been one-upped. So, well, I suppose it hurts when something's taken away from you. And what we know now is that these guys came out with better tech. They came out with leaner, meaner, more hungry bodies. And they evolved something called the atlatl. Now, it's difficult, but if you look it up, atl. So the compromise of using a spear is if you use a heavy enough spear to penetrate, it's too heavy to throw. And if you use a light spear that will carry, it's not got enough force of impact on point to penetrate. How do you balance these two things? So, we say spear very casually. People who work with these things have all kinds of terminology: pillium, assegai, javelin, so on and so forth. So we developed an amazing compromise called a spear thrower. So it's basically something like a handle you put onto a light spear, which you fletch with feathers at the end. So it looks like a ginormous arrow, okay, and you fling it out. So the difference is that the arc that you use for throwing a spear ends when your hand is perpendicular to your body. In this case, your arm goes all the way down and force is being diverted towards the projectile. Human beings...
An extra joint also in your hand.
Yeah, totally. Not to mention that modern humans have, I don't know if you guys can do this, but this is something I make my students do. Peter, do you have a keychain around and some loose change?
I have.
Let Peter do this.
Okay, keychain.
Okay, keychain. So Peter, open a lock. No, open a lock. Hold the key and open a lock.
All right. So I will be doing.
So you'll be holding it like this, right? This. So this is called key grip. Okay. So this is a key grip. This is a pen grip. Now this is a precision grip. This is what Homo sapiens had, that nobody had before us. We had this. We could precision make tools like nobody else could. We became the biggest killing machines on this planet. We'd already learned to hunt in packs. We now had wolves hunting alongside us, the early dogs, and we hunted in packs. We laid traps, okay? And we brought back food so efficiently that we worked 4 hours a day. Wouldn't you love that, Peter? Just 4 hours a day. That's the maximum working time in the Upper Paleolithic period. It gave us all the time in the world for music, art, poetry, drama, storytelling, worship, everything. All of the things that make us really human today came about because we had the time and because we saved the time from having to feed ourselves every single living minute like a cow, or compromising like a carnivore and having to take long breaks in between massive meals. So this was the compromise we made, and we are not really specialized at all. Specialization is that we are unspecialized. So there are a few changes. Our feet don't look like hands anymore, and we are a little fleeter than most monkeys are on the ground, but we can't compete with them in the trees any longer, can we? So we made some choices, but we're more or less not specialized. Okay. So we have stomachs that can absorb large amounts of meat, intestines that can do with grain, and we've learned to work with what we get. So we've learned to work seasonally, we've learned to follow the herds. Hunting and gathering are not necessarily men and women's jobs. Everybody is doing it. If you can do it and you can do it well, you do it. The reason that women hunt less than men is women have babies. Babies are the future of the tribe. So it's an exalted position. Staying back at camp and being pregnant is not a bad thing. It's like, wow, life. And we're managing to keep the populations down because we believe that there is a very interesting phenomena that takes place called one child in arms, which means that at any given time, a woman of the tribe can have only one child carrying in arms. If she has two children, all three will die. So if she has a second child while the first child is not moving around enough, then all three will die. So the second child, if it happens to come along by any chance, will be left by the wayside, unless there is some mother who's just lost a child.
Mhm.
And however brutal this sounds, and Christian missionaries were shocked when they saw this in the Amazon. They were completely devastated. They couldn't believe this. How can motherhood not want you to nurture that child? Because we'll all die. Because the other child's about a year old, which means that it's got a damn good chance of survival if it survived its first year. This guy has just been born. There's no telling what's going to happen, right? The mother, of course, is the most critical part of this, not the children. Women will bring more babies into the tribe, and women are providing working members of the tribe. So a woman is far more important than her children. Very difficult for us to come to grips with this today. Children were breastfed for years, before they were weaned off. And when they were weaned, they didn't drink milk or milk products after that. So no cheese and nothing. So to come back to today, what happened? Why did we start growing our own food? If we were so happy and got so much food, well, climate buggered us. There were these massive ice ages and ice sheets. And about 18,000 years ago, Il Capo up in the sky said, I'm bored with this people making snowmen business. Stop the ice. So the ice sheet started melting. And well, by about 16,000 years ago, all the ice sheets had melted and are where more or less they are today. So to give you an example, Norway and Sweden, there was so much ice on them, Peter, so much ice, that when the ice melted, the ground rose up 300 meters. That's why those fjords look like those deep cuts, because there was so much ice pressing the ground down, actually physically like a sponge.
Right.
Okay. And there were 2 kilometers of ice in some places. 2 kilometers of ice stacked up. I mean, that's taller than the Burj Al Arab, if I'm not wrong. Just imagine that much ice and it all melted. Where did it go? Into the seas. So sea level change. All the coastal boundaries that were kind of gently crumbling into the sea and then met the sea suddenly got inundated. All those coastal regions became warm seas. The seas became warmer because, well, it has to get warmer for that ice to melt. It gets wetter. So cold periods are horribly dry periods. Hot periods are wet periods because there's precipitation, right? Otherwise, all that precipitation is locked in ice. So guess what happened? All those low-lying areas in the coast were suddenly full of life. Life that had been fighting in ice-cold seas and reproducing in their millions so that they could survive a few, suddenly had these beautiful warm seas without predators, shallow seas, right? In which they could breed like mad. So human beings on the coast had food for the taking. I don't know if you've seen this, Peter, but if you've ever been down to Bandra or Khar and looked at the rocky coast, you'll see walls made of stone. At the tidal levels, you'll see these stone walls, and there's no wall on the landward side. It's just 2 walls going in and meeting in a V, or 3 walls making a box, and you wonder what they are. Some of them are probably ice age fish traps. right under our noses that we're destroying them. Well, never mind that. That's life. What you did was you built a beautiful wall and you chinked it as well as you could with stones, and you knew water would pass through it. But when the tide went out and all the little fishies and little prawnies and crabbies went out with it, they didn't realize there was the big wall at the end. Suddenly, there was a wall on three sides, and they had nowhere to go. And then the water ran out, and there was lunch and dinner laid out in front of you. Yummy, right? So you had food for the picking. You could stay in one place. You didn't need to follow the herds. You could spend a lot of time on the coast. So we have these things called shell middens, where people came for 3 or 4 months of the year and ate shellfish like it was going out of bloody fashion. There are mounds in Japan which are like 3 meters high, and there's just shells, just solid shells. We find tools in them, we find house remains in them, we find burials in them. Okay, we find fish bones in them, we find hooks in them, we find axes in them made of stone, because people were like, there's food for the taking, then take it. Same things in the forest. The forest became more foresty. All those areas that were under ice became grasslands. So there was so much more food for the animals, right? So more animals. What we didn't realize was, so one of our major problems at that time, about 12,000 years ago, Peter, was we hadn't read Charles Darwin. Well, of course, Charles Darwin hadn't been born, so that kind of might be not their fault that they hadn't read Darwin. The biggest thing that Darwin said was not about evolution, blah, 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 whatever. Darwin talked about something called the carrying capacity of the land. Basically, itna paisa mein itna ich milega. If there is this much grass, there will be this many deer. That means there can be this many humans living off that many deer. That's it.
Or other animals.
Whatever. So we didn't realize this. We overexploited the landscape and we had become sedentary. And when we became sedentary, we didn't have to kill our children. And, there were these long evenings, no Netflix, no internet, no table talk. What do you do after sunset? And, they say practice makes perfect. So we practiced procreation and we got damn good at it. Population explosion. Now suddenly, the amount of food is going down in the forests and the beaches. And the number of people have increased. War comes to mankind. I'm being very general because in a couple of hours, there's only that much we can do. War comes to us, and all of a sudden, weaker groups are pushed out of their foraging lands by stronger groups. Where do these weaker groups go, Peter? Where do they go? What do they do? They are forced to grow their own food, be it plant food, be it animal food. So we start animal husbandry first, actually, incipient animal husbandry first. And then we start gathering more and more grain. And then we start growing grain. So wheat and barley are two of the big crops that we grow because you need to grow something that grows once a year and can be stored to be eaten throughout the year.
When
So
start using animals like husbandry and things like that for things other than their meat, like for
much later. In the beginning, it's all about meat, leather, bone, horn, antler, that kind of thing. We are exploiting them for their body mass, not for their traction. Okay. The second thing we start exploiting a little later is milk. And what we believe today is that we didn't start drinking milk because we wanted to. We drank milk as a medicine. Because we lived in close proximity with our animals, one large rectangular hut, animals on this side, humans on that side, right? And animals keep it warm also, right? So it's a good thing. And you keep that dung collected and you burn your fires out of it. So just like COVID, things jump over from that side of the house to this side of the house. And you realize that the animals, their babies aren't getting these problems really badly. They seem to get mild cases and our babies get bad cases. We get the walloping chicken pox, which is actually the cow pox, okay? And the cows don't really get much of it. A little bit of rash, that's it. How come? Because the cows are giving antibodies to their babies through their milk. And we figure that out. So we give milk to our babies. We
Oh,
drink that
okay.
milk. We figure out that if we drink that milk is going to help us. It's damn difficult to drink that milk. You know, your lactose inhibitor has been shut down. You're not making lactase any longer, right?
Mm.
After being weaned.
Yeah.
So lots of farting and burping. And those of us who genetically happen to be predisposed not to shut off the lactase maker, we're the kings of the pie. If you noticed, when your mother keeps telling you to drink milk, drink milk, drink milk, but the day you have a bad tummy, she says, don't drink milk because she knows that it takes a lot to digest milk. And an upset tummy is already angry. Milk is not going to help it. So, curd is basically something we eat because it's pre-digested. The bacteria have already done their job. It's that much easier to digest. Curd, cheese, paneer, all of these things are eaten. So it's tasty, it's sweet because lactose is a sugar, it's yummy, it's got all that fat, yum yum fat, right? And guess what? We can find a way to preserve this curd. You hang up the curd, squeeze the bloody mother out of the water, and you keep it hung, and it turns into this thing called cheese. Yum. So we got cheese, we got curd, and that's what we're basically eating. Our animals are then for that and not for milk, as in milk to be drunk. After this, we move into the next phase. That's like, I'm going to Uncle Tom's place and he wants 5 bags of rice. How the hell am I going to take them? Take one of the cows with you and sling them on top of the cow, man. Good idea. I'll take 4 of the cows. They'll graze on the way. We'll carry the bags on the back. Traction. The Dhangars of Maharashtra were the the truckwalas of the early historical and the medieval periods. It was in the backs of their cattle, and they kept cattle, not sheep, goat. That rice moved from Maharashtra to Gujarat and Gujarat to Maharashtra and back and things like that. They were the Sardarjis and the Bishnois of that era. Okay? And tandas of 2,000 cattle are known to us. Their necklaces that the women wear and they carry their wealth with them are called dinar malas. And the name comes from the silver coins of Rome, the denarius. So it was the denarius of Rome that would be woven into malas, which the Dhangar women would wear as portable wealth when they, with their menfolk, brought their cattle loaded to the ports of the coast with all the goods of the hinterland. So these cycles of food are very, very interesting cycles. The fact that 4,550 years ago, in a small Neolithic village in Rajasthan, we have traces of jowar. Jowar endemically grows in Africa. How the hell did it get to India 4,550 years ago? It makes no sense. So the logical answer is some bird, migratory bird, pooped it. It self-pollinated and somebody else thought this was a good thing to eat. Yeah, but that sounds so wrong. But it's probably the only thing that makes sense. So we've got techniques now, Peter. We have something called protein residue analysis. So we no longer wash stone tools when we find them in the field in what we think is a primary context. Okay. And we send them for protein residue analysis. When it started, it cost about $1,000 a pop, and there was no guarantee. 1 out of 3 would work. Okay. I can't afford that as an Indian, even today. It's much cheaper. It's about, I think, $150, $200 a shot now. Okay. But we now know that 125,000 years ago, our ancestors in West Asia were eating rhinoceros. 125,000 bloody years ago, they were eating rhinoceros. And that there were rhinoceros in West Asia. No bones that we found, but we've got rhinoceros protein inside those knives that we've recovered from the site. I'm also eating duck and a few other things like that. But yeah, so there's some amazing stuff happening. And we also have something which looks at start cells. So we know that, a lot of people have asked the question about why did New Guinea never enter a food production stage? They did. They didn't have cereals. What they did was they started planting and harvesting the purple yam, the ube, in a very big way in massive farms, and then gave it up at some point. They decided it was not worth it. And we know this not because any of the yams survived, but the enough yam starch cells that we have in the axes that they use to process them. Okay. And we've now excavated. So Jack Golson then excavates over there and finds these beautiful fields that have been laid out in what is now jungle. And you have the gutters and the lines where water is being brought in, and you know that there is specific harvesting going on over here and agriculture. So there are places that refuse agriculture at some point. There are places that take to agriculture like it's mother's milk. We don't really know how and why these things happen. But it took us 100 years to realize that every single tree that grows around a village for about 2 kilometers in New Guinea is owned and planted by somebody. And that if you just asked, they tell you who owns that tree, and that person will be able to tell you who in his lineage planted that tree. And it's not that, oh, New Guineans live in these amazing oases that are full of food trees, and that's why people settle there. No, you idiots, people didn't settle there because there were these oases. They created these oases, you dumb buggers. Okay? So, it's all about coming from a city and not realizing that in a village, you sometimes just have to ask. And yeah, so there's some bad stuff and there's some good stuff, and some stuff works out. So many of these things. So we know that the oldest curry in India, for example, was a brinjal curry. And we've always known from the historical period that India had brinjals before anybody else. And we probably gave them to the Chinese, who, by the way, are crazy about brinjals. I mean, most of you all probably haven't eaten Chinese brinjals, but in China, it's a huge thing. And the Chinese have records going back 2,500 years cultivating brinjals. Okay. So the earliest curry that we know of, so Arunima Kashyap and Steve Weber actually worked on pots from burials at a site called Farmana. So we collected these pots from burials in which offerings would have been placed. And then very carefully, without washing those pots, we looked for lipid remains in the ceramics inside. So because these are slightly porous ceramics, lipids collect inside, lipid cells collect inside, and we can identify individual lipid cells and tell you where they come from.
Okay.
So we know that it was a brinjal curry. It was made with a mustard oil, turmeric, ginger, and garlic. That was the oldest curry in the world that we know of today, or at least on the Indian subcontinent. And we probably ate it with flatbreads made either with barley, jaw, or with wheat. We've played this hilarious ping pong with the Chinese for over 30 years. So we said, we've got rice 5,000 years ago. Chinese said, damn, how can they have the earliest rice? Go find rice. So Chinese archaeologists said, we've got rice 6,000 years ago. And we said, oh, that's really nice, but we just found a site that's 6,500 years ago. So the poor Chinese went back and said, we got a site that's 7,000 years ago. We said, oh, that's nice. One of our sites is 8,000 years old. Oops. So we did this for, and then we gave up, and now the Chinese have the oldest rice in the world. And but we realized that rice seems to have been perhaps cultivated at 2 or 3 places. Definitely the pig was domesticated in half a dozen places. And the modern pig is just a toned down version of the wild boar. It isn't actually very different. It's just like the dog. You put a Chihuahua, a wolfhound, or let me say a Great Dane, and a Plains wolf, and you put them in a line. And they're actually all the same bloody species. It's only subspecies level. So, Ramesh. Ramesh can probably do this amazingly well in a fabulous session on genetics and genetic diversity of our food and the animals around us. But, I've learned so much by talking to him. And just to tell you that so many different things, Peter, that we never thought about. The fact that, sheep and goat that we know today never existed in the past. So the stuff that always existed in the past, which we just modified a little, Sheep and goat, man, the stuff that we've done to them, okay, to get them where they are is like amazing. You know, there are no wild cows left in India anywhere. And the Gaur is not a wild cow.
Mm.
Okay. So we've eaten every single wild cow in India. So Bos Indicus, the modern Indian cattle breed, has no living wild ancestor. Ouch. Uh, yeah. Then there's some amazing stuff. We exported stuff. So we exported buffaloes to Iraq in the Bronze Age. Okay. We know this because the Iraqis have beautiful cylinder seals with buffaloes on them. We sent our buffaloes all the way to Italy. How the hell the buffaloes got to Italy and the Italians started making cheese out of buffalo milk? You know, I always thought it was a recent thing till I did a little research and said, no, the Italians have had buffaloes for virtually ever. It's like, oh, yeah, they came from India sometime in the past.
It's the Asian water buffalo.
Yeah. So don't say Asian water buffalo. There is two water buffaloes. There is two things. There is a water buffalo from Southeast Asia and there is a water buffalo from this side, South Asia. All the water buffalo enthusiasts will start tearing out their chest hairs. Yeah, but basically the Asian water buffalo. Luckily for us, the ancestor of the water buffalo is still around in parts of southern India and in Sri Lanka. Just telling you that Sri Lanka was joined to India and we didn't need any man-made bridge because when the ice sheets were up and the sea levels were down, you could probably walk across on a Sunday picnic to Jaffna from Rameshwaram and not realize the difference. So Bubalis Arni is very, very much around over there, you know, and they have beautiful wild herds. We have wild herds in India, and there is a slightly different wild buffalo in Southeast Asia from which we got them. And just to make matters difficult, there is this massive Cape buffalo, as it's called, which lives in Africa, you know, and they kill more people than lions and snakes combined and stuff like that. Well, you can actually cross a Cape buffalo with an Indian buffalo.
Okay.
So at some point, for reasons which I'm dying to ask the man, I want to resurrect him from his grave just to ask him. The Nawab of Jafrabad decided to import some Cape buffalo from Africa with the express purpose of crossing them with his local buffaloes. And there's an entire breed of buffaloes called the Jafrabadi buffalo, which has this, it looks like you've done a girl's painting in school with hair like this. It has horns exactly like that. And that's because it's a slightly confused cross, but it's this huge animal with a lot of meat and a pretty mild demeanor compared to the wild Cape buffalo. So yeah, it's a win-win situation. We chose animals which were not short-tempered and we ate the ones that were. That's how the basic breeding business works. You keep a few bulls with the kind of stuff that you want to pass on and you eat the rest or you gel the rest. Then, of course, you start bullock carts, and there's a lovely paper.
What were the animals that we had in India, you know, as domestic animals? I mean, we've talked about the goat, the sheep, etc. What else did India? I'm saying
sheep, cattle right from the beginning. Okay, so 9,000 years ago in the Bolan Valley, we've got all three of these, and we've got wheat and we've got barley, which means that they've all obviously come from somewhere else, but they're already growing all this stuff 9,000 years ago. Rice starts pretty early in India, at least 6,500 years ago in eastern Uttar Pradesh. And we know that in the Neolithic period, we are growing rice and we're switching over from wild rice or as a Rufi Pogon, which we kind of take home and then we fiddle with it to get the kind of rice that we want because we don't want it to fall off. So natural rice, you know, when it's ready to go, falls down and gets blown with the wind so that it can pollinate, self-pollinate. You don't want a self-pollinating species. You want the grains to stay on top so you can get them, and not the wind. So those are the ones you choose to grow. So it's a very simple selection process. You select what works out for you and you eat the rest. Okay, and you keep the selected stuff till you got enough of it going. And then you select further from it and further from it. So when people tell me about genetic modification, we've been genetically modifying stuff for 8,000 years in India, if not more. But was it tweaking it in the lab without figuring out what could happen to it? No. So balance again. So we've been eating wild animals all the time. It wasn't like we stopped eating wild animals because we started domesticating stuff. So nilgai, chital, sambar, hog deer, pygmy deer, wild buffalo, wild boar, elephant, rhinoceros. We've eaten it all when we could get it, and we kept hunting. We worked with fish. We salted fish, dried fish. We get fish in the charcoal lake in the Deccan, sea fish, which could only have come if it was salted. And it actually tells us a very important story. Why does that salt fish turn up in the Deccan? It doesn't turn up because it's a great delicacy in the Deccan. It turns up because traders are bringing salt into the Deccan. Because agriculturists need to add salt to their food. Every single one of us needs 3 grams of salt a day. We all get much more than that, so let's not go down that road. Hunter-gatherers don't need it. They get it from the blood of the animals that they eat. So their protein-rich diet takes care of their salt. When you become a farmer and you have a carb-heavy diet, you have to add salt. So salt becomes one of the most important commodities. And the oldest trade routes in the world are salt routes. I mean, it's the root of the word salary, for God's sake. You know, the Roman army each guy was paid a small stipend in salt, and that was his salarium, sal. Okay. And so, you know, stuff like this. And that's the amazing thing about food. Sarkar maine tumhara namak khaya hai, is what Kalia says in Sholay. Remember? What does it mean? It means I have eaten your salt. Nothing more dear than salt. In Europe, people who sat above the salt and below the salt. That was how it was divided in the dining rooms. So many different things, Peter, that keep telling us these stories again and again and again and again. I'm just going to get myself a mug of hot water. So the missus is being nice and giving me a mug of hot water. So what I'm trying to say, Peter, is that, you know, the story of food in India is a very, very interesting food story. The condiments we use, for example, what we don't realize, you know, I keep telling people that if there's one man you read, and you need to go back a little in time to read him, is the father of modern culinary anthropology, a guy called Sidney Mintz. And he wrote this horrendously smashing book on how sugar was responsible for the enslavement of black people. That the entire slave movement happened because of sugar. Okay, so Sidney Mintz's book on sugar is what everybody reads. They don't really read his articles, which have a lot of his concepts, which actually talk about why we eat what we eat. So, you know, I keep telling people that you don't understand when you're a farmer and you got to grow all the food that you eat. What is it that you grow that survives the year? Carbohydrates. So let me go back to my village in Chandler to give you an idea of the kind of food we've been eating forever and ever, Peter. Okay, it's only the last 50 years that have changed this. I was talking to this gentleman called Mr. Shinde, who was the, well, technical sarpanch of the village, though the sarpanch was a post that was reserved for a lady, and the lady's husband was the actual sarpanch, and the poor thing was made to dress up and sit there and rubber stamp things. But, well, whatever. Injustice is injustice, but yeah. So I'm talking to him, and he is not the lady's husband. He's traditionally the kapori tutti capo in the village, and well-off Maratha family, right? So I'm talking to him about growing up in the village and what they ate. So he said we grew nachni, which is basically your Elusina coracana, your finger millet, and we grew rice. These were the two things that we grew, and these were the two most important crops as far as we're concerned. He said every single morning I woke up in the morning and my mother would give me a hot bhakri made with nachni. And along with that, I would get a glass of hot milk. That was my breakfast every single day. Not cornflakes today, fried eggs tomorrow, puha day after, idli the day after that. No. Every single day, it was this. He went off to the fields with his father to work. What did they take? Cold rice bhakris and sukat. Dried prawns, tiny dried prawns, okay, which would be cooked with onions, oil, and spices. Okay, they have been soaked in water in the morning, and they'll be cooked, and they take this in the dabba with their rotis. Now, what you got to understand is there's this much dabba between 2 or 3 people of the sukat. So it's really fiery, okay, and oily. And there's lots of rice roti. So what Sidney Mintz is basically saying is that everything else apart from your cereal is a side. It's to make the cereal taste nice. Nutrition is far away. All this, oh, our people were so wise and they had nutrition. No, a lot of the nutrition that they had, they came across because, well, it just worked out for them. Okay. So all of these were sides to make sure the carbohydrate went down. But the carbohydrate was king. You could do without the sides. You could not do without the carbohydrate. So we are a carbohydrate eating people. And when people tell me about, oh, I'm doing a keto diet and I'm eating keto bread, and there are things that I want to say that I can't say on a family show. And yeah, I'm doing a paleo diet. I'm just eating the kind of things that lived in the Paleolithic period. I'm like,
I know at least one 16-year-old here today. So yes.
So yeah, so like don't even get me started on fat diets. And veganism is unnatural. Indians are not vegetarians. Every single Indian vegetarian is a lacto-vegetarian. Milk doth not come from a plant. There is no vegetable. I mean, you might think that cows are vegetative, but no, there is oat milk, almond milk, soy milk is not milk. It looks like milk. It's not milk. It doesn't have what milk has. Okay? We compromised. When we realized that we had a choice between meat and milk, we compromised and chose milk with occasional meat. And that became less and less occasional. Read the Rig Veda. It's replete with references of beef eating. Am I telling you to eat beef? No, please don't. I mean, eat what you want to eat. If you want to be vegan, be vegan. Just realize you're putting supplements into your body that you could get from nature. But you're choosing to be vegan. So, well, that's good for you, right? I mean, if you want to put in synthetic meds into your body, I mean, it's your body. What am I going to do?
I'm going to pause on that, and I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to ask you is if you'd like to do this again, in which case
I'd love to
continue on. But right now, I'm just going to go to a few questions and
Sure. Sorry, I can get evangelical about this.
Yeah. So Yazad, who had to leave, but he's left a statement. I mean, he told me earlier that he can't stay right through because he's in a different time zone. He says, I just started reading Mark Bittman's Animal Vegetable Junk, and it has a magisterial sweep of food history, but it's largely US focused. Is there something similar, but India focused, which leads to also what he says and what Pranav Gogwekar says, which is, sir, please write a book on this and please let us know if there's already one.
No, there isn't a book yet. I'm waiting for my 55th birthday. I hope to have enough data together to then sit enough money to be able to afford to write a book. Book selling does not make money. And Peter will tell you all about it. Publishing a book doesn't make any money. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time when you got to feed yourself, pay the electricity bills and the rent.
Okay, someone's already offering to help with the crowdfunding here in the chat, but yeah.
Get in touch with me, kurushdalal@gmail.com.
Yeah, everyone who wants further questions, etc., I'm going to ask Kurush later to also give me a list of perhaps reading that you guys can do. I have all your email addresses and I'd be happy to send it to you if you want this. My email address is zigzackly @gmail.com, and you can send. I'll anyway, whatever Kurush is sharing, I will share with you. This asks. This was with reference to, eating us consuming milk as a sort of a medicine. City populations with minimal animal contact really don't need to have milk, Anita asks.
At all. You don't need to have milk as long as you eat meat. If you're not eating meat, you damn well have to have milk. Let me explain to you in a simple way. Vitamin D. Well, if you're a vegan, you need to eat 5 kilos of button mushrooms a day to get your daily requirement. Or you take a pill. 30 grams of fish does that for most people. 30 grams of fish, that's this much. Milk works fine too. Meat, just as well. Vegan, pill poppers.
Charasmita asks, can you share where to find the rhino residue paper on it? Has there been a paper published?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll come back to you with that, Charasmita.
I'll share a picture.
Yeah.
Should I be mean and say, do my course?
Yes, of course you can. And please put the link for your course in there as well if you can.
I'll share the link with you. They'll be
I'll
coming in
share.
post
Yeah.
office.
Yeah.
And you can share it with the people here.
Couple of things again related to animals and basically not vegetarian food, where insects considered as food. And I can tell you that yes, as even me, the layperson, knows that there are people who still consume insects as part of their diet now, here and now. So it's not a question of the past. Yeah.
So insects have been very much part of our diet. See, we've got very weird European notions these days about insects being yuck. Our ancestors didn't really have a problem with that. So, for example, the only insect that it is halal to eat, according to Muslim dietary law, is the locust. The locust is absolutely halal. The reason for this is once the locusts have gone, there's nothing left to eat but locusts.
Yes.
So the locust is fine, and there are amazing preparations. Locusts dipped in honey were a great delicacy and were preserved in honey. And then, they became not subsistence food, which people who were dying were eating, but they became a very fancy food to be served to royalty. Locusts dipped in honey. Similarly, in the Bastar region, red ants and red ant eggs are regularly raided from their nests, and they bring them in a matka to the market, and they make these little puris out of leaves, and they'll scoop it in, put a leaf, put 2 pins into it and give it to you, and you carry it, and well, all the ants stay inside, and then take it back home and you grind it into a chutney, and it's a yum tasting chutney. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't have much salt there, and they get their salt out of these ants. The same ants and their eggs, but mainly the eggs and less ants, are scrambled with a duck's egg in Assam and made into one hell of an omelette. The same people who do this also grow silkworms, and they always, realize that they can only feed this many silkworms and allow this many larvae to turn into pupae, right? So they eat the rest of the larvae, and they're flash fried with a little bit of garlic, some onion if you can, a little haldi and salt. That's it. Mustard oil. Yummy tasting stuff. Crunchy on the outside, gooey on the inside, kind of like fishy almond paste with a crunchy exterior. Would I eat them again? Not really. It didn't really float my boat. If I had to, would I eat them? Oh, damn well if I would. You go to Australia, some of the top hotels in Australia, 5-star hotels, will serve you witchetty grubs in brown butter. They're bugs this big. They're larvae which come out of rotting logs. This big, this fat. Yummy. They're almost pure fat and protein and nothing else. So, by the way, guys, the food of the future is insects. You can grow insects on very small amounts of food and very small amounts of land with very little investment and get almost pure protein and fat out of it. All of the chitin of the insects is protein. Next time you squash a cockroach, think about it.
Maitre asks a question and says, this is a little weird, but we know Indians tamed elephants first. I'm not sure of that, but yeah, okay. But did we ever try to farm them for meat? Because surely no animal gives more meat than the elephant. And
we didn't farm them for meat, but we did kill them for meat. So for a very long time in the Northeast, elephant meat was a great delicacy. I remember about 20, 25 years ago, it was $450 a kilo when it was available, and it was completely clandestine. Did I eat it? No, because I thought it was wrong. Animals are domesticated and then farmed as such, or vice versa, but it's a package. Farming means selective breeding. Okay, so animal husbandry is about selective breeding. Elephants were tamed, they were never farmed. So we tamed elephants. We took wild elephants and tamed them, and we beat them in the early days, and we would chain them to a pair of tame elephants and force them to follow them in everything till we broke the elephant, very much like the waterboarding that's done in Guantanamo. And then once we've broken them, then we use them like the other elephants. So it was not really a very nice thing. But we also started using a lot of elephant babies that were born in captivity, because a few tuskers were maintained because of their majesty. So most Indian female elephants don't have tusks traditionally. The males are the tuskers, unlike the Africans. So Loxodonta, everybody has tusks. Elephas maximus, mainly only the males have tusks. There is actually a variety of elephant from Sri Lanka, which is slightly different actually, where there are few tuskers even amongst the males. So all males are not tuskers. Neither are they in India, but we have a higher propensity. It's probably because tuskers were hunted. So tuskless males had a better chance at procreation than males with tusks. So it kind of paid to not have tusks. Okay, I know, very weird. But so we didn't domesticate elephants. It's only in the last 40, 50 years that we have de facto started domesticating elephants, because wild elephant populations are now verboten. You cannot touch them in South India or in Sri Lanka. So you have to use only the offspring of elephants born in captivity. And believe you me, it's not fun trying to do this. The other reason is that elephants have internal testicles. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, you know, elephants for their size would have very large testicles, and those testicles are just missing when you look at an elephant. That's because their testicles are internalized. So one of the things that you need to do, and I'm sorry, Peter, for being a little about it, but you need to castrate all those males whose seed you do not want passed on. So castrates are a major part of the process, and we've actually learned how to find them in archaeology. So there's an amazing PhD thesis by Pramod Joglekar on a site called Valki, which was a cattle station in the Bronze Age in Maharashtra. And he's been able to prove that the process of domestication, that less than 2% of the males were allowed to come to full age. The rest were all snip, snip, and used for various other purposes. And there were very few stud bulls. The rest were just castrates. And
what was this again?
It's a study by Pramod Joglekar, Professor Pramod Joglekar, just and a brilliant study in archaeozoology, using archaeozoology and archaeostatistics together. So basically, there's a very interesting bone that grows in your body, which we also have, called the astragalus. It's one of the few cattle bones that's not cut up, broken up, boiled, stewed, and whatever, because it's a solid bone. It's the bones that you use for knuckle bones, you know, but from smaller animals, of course. So that was one intact bone that you keep finding in the archaeological record because it's useless. So he studied all those intact bones and was able to provide a beautiful graph where there was a tiny group over here, okay, of stud males, then two interlocking circles of females and castrates. They overlap. And then, of course, all the juveniles that had been culled.
Right.
So that was the proof of the pudding. I'm again making it simple, but the proof of the pudding that yes, this is the way it happens.
As far as I know, the youngest member of our audience today, Aviv asks two questions. One is about the spear throwers we talked about, the atlatl. Did we start using those at some point? Because Aviv says he has not read of them being used after the Bronze Age.
So the American Indians continued to use them. The South American Indians continued to use them, but they didn't really have a Bronze Age. They were in the Stone Age till they were discovered. The Australian Aborigines continued to use them till very recently. Slightly different pattern, but ultimately doing the same thing. And some of the most beautiful atlatls come from the early Paleolithic period, the Magdalenian. They're made out of ivory. And, you know, so at the end you have a hook. And they're decorated because they're made out of ivory. So these are hilarious decorations. There's this one of this poor deer, okay? And this deer is taking a poop. And it's a massive poop. And there are two little parrots sitting on his poop. And the parrot beak makes the hook, where you hook the atlatl. So yeah, there was a crazy sense of humor. And we have more than one of those. So it was such a hit item, obviously, that the guy who made it was made to make more of these.
Okay.
So it tells you about, you know, this kind of thing taking place 25,000, 28,000 years ago. So yeah, there's some crazy stuff that goes down.
Aviv, your other question is actually okay, we answered this in a different context, in a different talk. Aviv asks about, you know, we know that some foods that we have here came in from Mexico. We've talked about chocolate, corn, tomatoes, chilies, things like that. What spices did the Indian subcontinent use before these spices from abroad came in?
So round pepper, Piper nigrum, was definitely Indian. The Romans came to us to take it in huge quantities from the Kerala coast. And we know that for a matter of fact. We have amazing ports with huge vessels full of peppercorns that we found uh, leading up to uh, Egypt. So from Myos Hormuz to Koptos by road, but from India to Myos Hormuz by sea. So we know that. We also find Indians liked wine. So we didn't want any of the stuff that the Italians made. We said, you want our pepper, that's fine. You want the clothes that we make, the cotton that we make, that's fine. But we don't want your stuff. Your stuff is just not on par, and we think it's subpar. But that wine stuff, you can leave some of that behind. So the duty-free nonsense that we've got going, India consumes more black label than is made by Johnny Walker. So yeah, it's a fact. Very weird fact, but it's a fact. So we've got amphorae handles, and we can actually tell from the amphorae what period they belong to, and in some cases, which town they came from. So this is a Rhodian amphora. It was only made in Rhodes, that kind of thing. And so we know that we had beautiful trade with them, and we only wanted rokada from them. Very few people know this, but India was single-handedly responsible, Maharashtra actually, for the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. So Maharashtra did in the Roman Empire by only taking rokada from the Romans for all the Indian purple that we sold them. The beautiful indigo dyed cotton cloth that came from Marathwada region. Okay. And we said, we don't want your goods. Now, there has to be there will be a trade deficit if you only pay cash. So that's what basically happened. The Roman merchants were paying solid sestertii and denarii and ore for the materials that they were buying from us. And we were saying, yes, take some more. And you have these beautiful impassioned speeches by Marcus Aurelius in the Senate, begging the people of Rome to stop buying the Indian purple because we've had to devalue the sestertii. Okay, we can't do this anymore. You guys got to stop buying this stuff. And the Romans said, yeah. And the Maharashtrians said, no. And they walked all the way to the bank and there was no Maharashtra. Maharashtra, of course, also killed the dinosaurs, but that's another story.
But yeah, wasn't that something to do with, meteorites and all that kind of thing? Meteors coming in and the Deccan Plateau, the Deccan traps and whatnot. That did have some role, not just the Marathas.
Yeah. So Maharashtra is, I tell you, Maharashtra is, every time you walk on the Deccan Plateau, it's the greatest genocidal weapon in history. It's the biggest murder weapon of all time. The greatest extinction that we know of, okay, that took place on the KT boundary, the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary, that's the murder weapon. Think of it. All those Buddhist caves are cut into the greatest murder weapon in the world. See, you can take anything anywhere if you want to.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly flipping through questions again. Who introduced groundnut oil to us?
The Portuguese. They brought the groundnut.
All right. Other than the brinjal curry we spoke about, do we know of any other ancient recipes?
Oh, so we know that we probably made cheese and curd out of buffalo milk in Kutch. I mean, I know, it's kind of weird, but most of the sites that were doing milk processing in the Kutch preferred buffaloes to cows. It was like, buffaloes are fattier milk. Buffalo milk is yummalicious. Cow milk is like, yeah, not happening. So we have the first evidence for processed milk coming from a site called Kotara Bhadli, which was excavated by Dr. Prabodh Chirwalkar of the Deccan College a few years ago. And he spent 5 years with his pottery unwashed. And pottery comes out in huge chunks and is very diagnostic. And he couldn't analyze his pottery because he had to wait for the teams who were going to do his protein residue analysis and things like that to come and choose the potsherds that they wanted to and get the results out before he could then take the bulk of the pottery and say, okay, let's wash the damn stuff and see what we have.
Okay.
So yeah, there are compromises. And if you're lucky enough to have a good team to work with, you can have magic. But all of these labs are virtually without exception outside our country. We have to rely I mean, I don't mind relying on them, but I would like to have to see laboratories like this in India also. So we have one laboratory that does C14 in India, technically two, but the other one says you got to give us all your plant samples and this and that, and you have to tell us what age you're expecting. So I'm like, if I tell you what age I'm expecting and then you give me an age, then that is little bit lafada is going on, no?
Yeah, yeah.
So well, that's the way we work in
It's
India.
kind of ironic, really, that for all the store that we place on ancient India and the glories of ancient India, that we actually seem to want to find out exactly what happened at that
They're
point.
fakos, man. They're fully fakos. So, oh, India, fantastic, India the greatest, but I already know everything. What you're going to tell me? So every time I hear about this amazing site that's been discovered in Tamil Nadu called Kiradi, okay? I can't say that ZH sound the way the Tamilians do, so apologies for that. So Kizadi is there. It's an amazing site. For the first time, we have a site that early which is showing urbanization in that neck of the woods. But for some reason, it is being compared to Mohenjo-daro, which died 2000 years before Kizadi.
Yeah.
Why? What is this fascination? All the Mohenjo-daro people were Dravidians. Where did that come from? Those hypotheses are old and they're gone. Let's strip them away and get on with life. This is nonsense. Instead of taking the amazing stuff that we have and being proud of it, we want to give to bullshit. I still remember the way in Maharashtra we worship Chhatrapati Shivaji. And the ridiculous things we say about him. I was once asked, do you know what he did for women's emancipation? So I was like, women's emancipation was what from the 70s, boss. The 1970s, not the 1670s. So I said, yeah, he married 8 wives. I looked at me and said, what are you saying? Yeah, he married 8 wives, historical fact. Don't ask me. Check your shit. Yes, he had 8 wives because it was politically correct. There were political liaisons. All those people who go, Maharaj, I want to ask them, can you name Maharaj's 5 daughters? When you can name Maharaj's 5 daughters, we'll take this discussion ahead. The bloody buggers don't even know he had daughters. Sorry. Yeah, we are like that. See, there was a beautiful plan to put up an accelerator in Bombay University in the physics department, which would do carbon-14 dating, because now the old machines are all passé. We use something called accelerators, which use tiny samples. We can now date rock art, where the paintings were made with pigments that use plant juice and animal blood. So we can take a gram from a painting and date it for you. Stuff like this that is essential in India.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what did we do? We sat on our fat backsides because the guys who came and DST project, this, that, money is brought in. And this is in massive numbers of crores, okay? And they said, okay, you got to have a separate structure for this. So structure was identified, it would be reinforced, etc. The university said yes, and the university did nothing about it. Finally, Professor Kothari, who was in charge of that project, retired. The machine came from England and sat in storage. And finally, the guys wrote and said, okay, guys, you have a 1-year warranty. When the warranty runs out, your free installation runs out too. And then if it gets installed and it doesn't work, that's your problem. We still didn't get off our asses. So we've got a multi-crore rupee machine in wraps for the last 5 years sitting in the university campus. Multi-crores. Apathy. Don't get me started, Peter. I mean, we don't give a shit in India for our heritage. Pappu loves Tina is what you will find scribbled on the forts of Maharashtra. And Aarti is incredibly popular also for some reason, and so is Preeti. But they're all loved.
What Avinash Jadhav wants to know, are there manuscripts or inscriptions? The oldest manuscript or inscription that we know of related to food in the subcontinent?
So the oldest manuscripts that date to food are the Rig Veda, whose date is highly controversial. And by the way, all of these manuscripts only talk obliquely about food. They're not about food. They happen to mention food. Okay. The ones that talk more seriously are about 2,500 years old, like the Sushruta Samhita, which is written by Sushruta, the great physician, and the Charaka Samhita, written by Charaka, which is a little later than that, probably. And these roughly 2,500-year-old Ayurvedic texts tell you what to eat, when to eat, how to eat. Okay. But then the Ayurvedic people also tell you shouldn't really enjoy your food. Food is not about enjoying. You need food, it's fuel. You need this at this time of the year and that at that time of the year, and this for this dosha and that for that dosha. Enjoying food is a no. The Buddhists do the same thing afterwards. So yeah, it's a little difficult when people keep telling you not to enjoy your food, and you got Indians who are probably the biggest foodies. I mean, I hate that word, but they're foodies around the place. So yeah, it's kind of weird. A lot of what we know about our food comes very obliquely and in all kinds of indirect manners, which is why nobody wants to work on food and the history of food in India, because it takes an enormous amount of work. You need to know how to read Sanskrit, you need to know how to read Tamil, you need to learn how to read the ancient scripts. So it's not, Tamil is not enough. Do you know Sharda? Do you know Grantha? Do you know Tamil? Do you know Tamili? So on and so forth, right? So similarly for North India, and you want to go back to the original sources wherever you can if you're a good historian. So it's virtually impossible to compile this kind of data. And the few people who've done it have either done it because they were told to do it and therefore there was no heart in it, or they're putting together whatever bits and pieces they can without anybody to really tell them what to do. There are probably 3 food historians in India that I would recommend, and I'm not one of them. I'm not a food historian as much as the newspapers regularly like to say it. I've got sick and tired of saying culinary anthropologist does not translate as food historian. Okay, but I've given up now. Uh, Dr. Mosina Mukadam of Ruya College. I mean, oh my God, that lady. Dr. Pushpesh Pant from Delhi. Vikram Doctor. These people are food historians. Very few other people who claim to be food historians are food historians. They might talk about histories of certain foods. That does not make you a food historian. Sorry about that.
I'm going to get Doc on the show one of these days from Doc. He and I and our advertising careers go back together. We started out in Lintas at the same time.
Oh, you must. He's a phenomenal speaker. Such a joy.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's
definitely in. Doc, for many years, completely forswore all forms of social media, but in the last year or so, seems to have changed his mind and is doing Instagram finally.
Yes, finally. We were so happy to have him on board. He had an amazing, by the way, for those of you all who want to read stuff and hear stuff, there's an amazing food podcast by Vikram Doctor. Sadly, he gave it up because it makes no money. Okay, podcasts, you might not believe it, but it actually cost a lot of money to make and make virtually no money even when you subscribe to them. So he's done one of the most amazing food podcasts, and especially on Indian food, and some of the stuff that he's put together is phenomenal. I mean, I keep telling people, we go on and on about the Columbian exchange and we talk about the Portuguese. We don't understand how much the British pushed a lot of these products because they wanted them for the army, like potatoes. And it wasn't the Portuguese saying, grow potatoes, grow potatoes, grow potatoes outside Goa. They weren't really. Though they did escape from Goa. The potato is a strong contender for escaping along with the chili. The earliest reference we have to chilies in India are actually from a beautiful hymn by the court poet of the Vijayanagar king, Purandaradasa, who compares the green chili and the red chili to Vishnu in his different avatars. And we have in the late 16th, early 17th century, actually, a Maharashtrian cookbook is the first Indian cookbook to actually talk about potatoes. And chilies, by the way, in all the Mughalai food that you eat, which is full of chilies, the Mughal court did not have chilies in its kitchens till Bahadur Shah Zafar's time. Recorded fact. Okay. Amazing places to read about food, the Akbarnama. There are a few food texts also. So Someshwara's Manasolasa has an entire chapter on food, and the king tells you about the delicious taste of bandicoots. You know, those nice large bags that you see in the Kachri bus. Yumlicious, says the king. Um, and you have the Nimatnama, written in the Deccan just before the advent of the Portuguese. So there are texts, but there are few and far between. And the only complete copy of the Nimatnama is in the British Museum.
Okay.
If you want to use a photograph, you've got to pay them royalty. Hurts, Peter. That hurts. Solid it hurts. साला अपन का लेगेसी तेरे कमरे में तू पैक करके रखा, तेरा एक फोटो वापरने को तो $50, £50, £500 ऐसा बोलेगा.
Yeah. So, yeah, Kevin's still here, so I'll ask his question. I think it's not exactly an easy question to answer, but Kevin Lobo asks, do we know when spice was used for the first time and which one was it?
So, like I said, the spices that were basically used were the two peppers, cardamom, green and black, cassia bark. These are all Indian spices, and they're definitely part and parcel of our food. And if the Ayurvedic texts are talking about them, then they've definitely been around from before that, right? So we believe that more work is being done on trying to get food remains from the Bronze Age and from more Harappan sites and things like that. But definitely from the second urbanization, as we call it, about 2,500 years ago, there is a large scale use of spices wherever available and wherever possible. There are also a lot of spices in India which we don't use these days and whose virtual existence we've forgotten. So the long pepper, for example, which is far tastier than the round pepper, but is a pain in the ass to grind. Long pepper grows wild in Mahim Nature Park. You can probably bring back a couple of kilos, okay, at the right time of the year. You can get it at most of your Ayurvedic shops, okay. So so that was one of the things. Then you have something called tepal that we call in India, also sometimes called trifle or tirfal, okay, which is basically a cousin of the Sichuan peppercorn.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sichuan peppercorn and the Nepalese variant. So the Sichuan peppercorn is the spiciest. The Nepalese variant comes about in the middle, and ours is the lowest. It has this beautiful lemony, peppery taste. It's still eaten in parts of Goa, and the Goans won't make dal without it because according to them, it cuts flatulence. Okay, so that's definitely a good thing going for it. So things like nak kesar, we don't use it. Bagad fool, we don't use it. So many different spices like this, which we've completely and totally stopped using. Plus, there are a number of wild spices that were used at different times in different places. And sometimes what we used to forage is completely in a gray zone. We have no idea. I think we've lost Peter.
No, Kurush, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you clear.
All right. My internet connection is now shaky, and we're well over the 2 hours that we were planning to.
Kurush Dalal at @gmail on email. I don't promise to immediately answer mails. Takes a little time to me, but definitely be happy to answer everything. As Peter says, the connection's petering out now, but that's a terrible pun. Peter's going to hate me for that. But Vikram Doctor's podcast is called the Real Food Podcast, by the way, for those of you who are interested. And like I said, we'll be very happy to take any questions. I keep posting for those who want to have a more serious look at things. The Studying Food Workshop puts up its next iteration from born as pinwheels, pinworms and shit for the next 20,000 years. So yeah, too much of that. Thank you for these few questions. And I think I'll call it a day today. Thank you very much. And if Peter has me back after all this, I'll be very happy to come back sometime. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night. Stay safe. Wear a mask. Get yourself vaccinated.